about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward.
To infinity and beyond!
Some people without brains do an awful lot of talking, don't they?
It's classified.
You talking to me?
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
I can't lie!
Expecto Patronum!
Entertainment X.
You never know what you're gonna get.
For this episode, I sit down and chat with Sue Frost. She's one of the founding creators of Junkyard Dog Productions. They've produced Broadway productions such as MEMPHIS and Come From Away. We talk about all of that and more, her upbringing, her thoughts behind production and human communication, and her life path. It's really a wonderful, wide-ranging, winding conversation that I hope you enjoy as much as I did having the conversation with Sue. So keep on keeping on. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we're back. I'm Clayton Howe, and today with me is Sue Frost. Sue, thank you for inviting me into your workspace here in the lovely Times Square Paramount Pictures building.
It's great to have you here.
This is fun. We're going to have a wide-ranging conversation
Sure.
about everything
Okay.
thus far in
well,
time.
good luck.
Thank you. Let's take it back to the beginning of time.
Okay.
For Sue. What were your theater dreams growing up?
It's so funny. I don't know that I had theater dreams growing up. I think I discovered theater as a kid. I was got the lead in the Girl Scout play because I think I was the only person who could remember all the lines. And I had such an amazing time with an audience, and I thought, well, this is what I want to do. So I mostly concentrated on acting as a kid. Drama class, drama club really kind of saved me in high school in terms of finding a place where I belonged.
Yeah.
I think that's a typical story for a lot of kids who aren't necessarily into sports or the popular kids. I was
Right.
always a bit of an oddball, and so I found theater and I had a fantastic time.
What was your transition then from the performing to not performing?
To not performing.
Yeah.
Well, I think part of performing was I didn't know there was anything else.
Okay.
When I was in college, I was a theater major with a concentration in acting. My advisor gave me very good advice very early on. He said, as a performer, you shouldn't just focus on performing. You should absorb as much as you can about everything to do with theater, and even beyond that, paintings and music and all those different things. Don't be so focused so early on. I also spent summers working at the Berkshire Theater Festival, not as an actor, but in admin, simply because I needed to work to make money.
Yeah.
And so those jobs led me to relationships that got me jobs here in New York when I graduated from college, and they were business management jobs. They were not acting jobs. And I realized fairly early on, even though I had come to New York to pursue an acting career, that I wasn't really cut out for it. I was doing all the character roles at school, so I knew it'd be another 20 years before I was going to actually be a character actress.
Right.
And I just wasn't driven in that way.
Yeah.
But I was driven to stay in theater. So those management jobs led to becoming a company manager apprentice, and then ultimately a company manager. And
Wow. What did your parents teach you about work ethic?
My parents, they never put limits on me. They never tried to point me in any one direction. I don't think they understood what I was interested in. We were not an artsy family, My dad was a plumber who became a plumbing and heating salesman. My mom was a housewife who became a telephone operator. We did not go to the theater. I went to the theater through school, but it was not something that we did as a family. So, but my hard workers, salt of the earth people, you don't flinch away from the hard stuff. All of those good lessons, I think.
Yeah.
And always very, very supportive of what I did.
Was there, I'm just curious, that's such a great piece of advice. Don't flinch away from the hard stuff. Was there a moment in time where you learned that?
Well, I think there are ongoing moments in time where you learn that, you know, and you have to kind of tell yourself, even if you flinch away, don't run away, and face all that stuff.
Yeah. What was the deciding factor to kind of continue this as like a living, you know, after
Well, you know,
hobbies
other
turn
than
into-
working in a grocery store in high school,
Yeah.
and as a librarian's assistant, I have never done anything else than theater. I've never earned a dime any other way. So I think it was just something that, even though I wasn't necessarily sure what I was going to do or where I was going to fit into the landscape, I knew that as an industry or as a vocation, it was something that I was crazy about and wasn't particularly interested in anything else.
Okay. And then, and I read a little bit, we'll talk about Junkyard Dog Productions,
Sure.
and we're going to cover all of it. And please fill in any spots that I might be missing. But was company managing your first kind of like...
No, I mean, I fell into it, honestly. And
Really?
and no, but because when I was coming to New York, and folks that I had worked with at the Berkshire Theater Festival pointed me to jobs, and then Charlie Willard, who was a mentor of mine, was the company manager of a tour of A Chorus Line, and he asked me to come out as his assistant. I can't say that I woke up one morning and said, I'm going to be a company manager. It's just a job that was offered to me.
Yeah.
I had a great time. I was on the road for a year. I learned a lot. I came back and I worked in Marvin Krause's office. And working in Marvin's office at that time was very exciting and fun. He had a lot of projects. I worked with a lot of people who are still in this business, leaders in this business now. And then I just, it seemed natural to focus on company management because that's the work I was doing.
Of course.
But after I had closed the rink on Broadway as a company manager, I thought, I don't think it's ever going to be this much fun again. I think, that was a show that was such a highlight for me career-wise. And I wasn't necessarily in love with all of the company management work, but I was in love with being part of the company. So I just decided it was time to take a break.
Okay.
And I stopped company managing and just stopped working for a few months, went home to Rhode Island, and thought about what I wanted to do.
Company managing.
Yes.
And producing.
Yes.
How have you gotten better at human communication, communicating with others?
I think you have to constantly remind yourself. This is a people business. It's never going to not be a people business, right? And as much as you sit there at your desk, sort of sucked into your email, there are things that will never be solved or issues that will never be settled if you don't approach them head on, person to person. And over time, I mean, obviously, I'm old. I predate email. I come from a world where you had a Rolodex and you picked up the phone and you called people, and that's what you did, and you were on the phone all day.
Yeah.
And part of me misses that, because there are times when I'm going back and forth on an email. I'm like, why am I doing this? Pick up the phone, solve it,
Yeah.
So I think there is always that lesson to be learned, that human contact, direct contact. I mean, it's why I think people go to the theater. There's nothing between them and what's happening on stage. You're not looking at a screen. You're not listening to something through earbuds. You're actually experiencing it. So as far as what I've learned in terms of communication, let's go back to that don't flinch away.
Yeah.
There are times when you have to make hard decisions and you have to have hard conversations, and you can't leave those. As a producer, and often as a company manager, you couldn't really leave those to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I am not a person who enjoys conflict. I avoid it at all costs. But there are times when you have to have the tough talk, and that's, I think I've learned more than anything, is when you think you can defer it and give it to somebody else, but in your heart you can't. Just do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Has it gotten any easier?
No, it never gets easier, particularly if you're going to be delivering painful news.
Yeah.
But I think you owe it to yourself and the person that you're talking to be direct about what it is.
When you know, you know. You got to let them know.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
It is very true. What was the journey from the national tours to Goodspeed? Did it happen?
Well, like
in
I
that
say,
order?
no. I was doing the touring, then I came back, and then I was the company manager in the rink. And then when I stopped company managing and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, a friend of mine was doing a production up at the Goodspeed, and he called me and he said, they're really looking for somebody here right now. They're in a big transitional place, and you might be the right person for it. Are you interested?
Yeah.
I know you're not working right now. And I said, yeah, check it out.
Okay.
And I really honestly thought I was going there for the summer, and I stayed there for 20 years.
No.
Yeah.
Was it the views?
No, it wasn't the views. It was the work, honestly. I went out there in 1985. They just opened the Norma Terris Theatre.
Beautiful theater.
Beautiful theater, and the intent was to program it with new work, all new musicals.
Okay.
But there wasn't necessarily an infrastructure in place to support that. It's like with anything. If they'd actually sat down and looked at how hard it was going to be, they probably wouldn't have done it. So, but I was there. It's right place, right time.
Okay.
And I said, well, I'll do that. I mean, I was brought in kind of to build up the production team. And I had a myriad of titles because nothing ever actually suited me. But I ultimately said, well, I'd like to take on this programming and start to figure out where these shows come from and how to put them on and who's writing. And at that point in time, new musicals were kind of a rare beast. But because Goodspeed had a history of producing new musicals, Annie came from there, Shenandoah came from there, Man of La Mancha came from there. We were one of the few places at that time that was actually actively pursuing new musicals. With very different landscape now.
Yeah. What was that? So I know all musicals come from different directions, but was there an order in which, standout story in your mind of how you were acquiring new material, or how new material came to you, or how you guys were choosing new material to work on there?
No, because it wasn't really a formula.
Okay.
I started to, because we're only a couple of hours outside of New York. I would come in a lot and go to readings and presentations. Certainly some of the artists that we worked with on the main stage was mostly revivals, but part of what made Goodspeed so special, they would not just revive a show, they would rethink a show sometimes, and particularly if the authors were still alive, and invite them to be part of that conversation. So I worked with some really amazing people in this business, and oftentimes a director would say, I've been working on this new show, I wondered if you'd look at it. Or, it became over time developing those personal relationships as much as anything. And sometimes something would just come in over the transom that you'd read it and you go, wow, I don't know who this is, but wow,
Yeah.
So it was a myriad of ways to find shows.
What are your views on relationships in this industry?
Well, there's about 12 people in this business, and you will keep running into them, right?
Yeah.
So treat people well. I guess that's my bottom line. It is a very small business, and it is a business of passion, and but it is a business, So
Yes.
it's a weird dichotomy, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But you just do it, right?
Yeah.
So relationships are hugely important, whether it's a collaboration of people putting together a new musical, or whether it's making that deal, or you could work with somebody and 20 years later you'll be working with them again that you never in your wildest dreams thought you'd run across them again, and you do. And other people you see all the time. So
that is so true.
Yeah.
What was the cultivation of relationships with Kenny, Randy, Marleen, yourself, and the creation of
Junkyard? Yeah. Okay. So after 20 years at the Goodspeed, I decided to leave. I like to say that they were going to throw me a party, and when they try to throw you a party, it's time to go. You've been there too long. And I felt like I had, another big adventure ahead of me, and I really didn't know what it was. Again, similar to I have a pattern. Every 20 years, I quit and try to figure it out. So I stopped working at the. I told Michael and everybody at the Goodspeed I was going to leave, but I gave them like 6 months notice, so I was still there for a long time. Randy I knew because we were both on the board of the National Alliance for Musical Theater. Randy was running Theater Works in Palo Alto. And they had a new works division there. They were developing a lot of new works. We had very similar tastes in terms of writers and projects. We spent a lot of time. And at that time, when we were on the board at NAMT, we were kind of, really kind of some of the most vocal advocates for new work. So we had a lot in common. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with these 20 years of experience and relationships. And so somebody asked me if I would put together a proposal for a new works development program. And so I was working on it, and I said, well, development is fine, but in a vacuum, it's not effective. So it needs to be development, then it needs to be production, and then it needs to be distribution.
Yes.
Pardon me. And then, so I'm putting this and talking about it, and Randy's one of the people I'm bouncing ideas off of. And ultimately, the person who asked me to do this decided to go in another direction. But Randy said, it's too bad. It's a great plan. Maybe we should do it. And I said, well, you have a job. And he said, well, you had a job. You quit your job. I quit. And he just quit his job. He said, I'm ready. I'm ready for something new, too. So we decided we were going to start this company. And we didn't have any idea how we were going to put it together. We didn't really know what it was going to be. We just knew we were going to try to focus on getting new musicals out into the marketplace. Not necessarily Broadway, but our years in regional theater had taught us that there's a big appetite for new musicals all over the country, and there's a lot of different resources, and felt like all it needed was people to sort of figure out how to aggregate those resources, right?
Right.
So that's what we were talking about doing. And then another friend of ours who was also on the board of NAMP said, well, this is all well and good, but how are you guys going to do this? And we were like, well, we're going to reach out to investors and try to figure out if we can come up with an investment pool of people who wanted to get behind us and get behind the idea of developing all these new shows. And she introduced us to Kenny and Marleen. Because they're based in Seattle. They love musical theater. She was from Seattle. It was Marilyn Sheldon from the Fifth Avenue. And she knew Kenny and Marleen because of their philanthropic work in Seattle and their real connection to the Fifth Avenue. And she said, I got somebody I want you to meet. So we met. And we were at the time, Randy and I were talking about wanting to do Memphis. So when we were getting ready to meet, we said, well, why don't you take a look at the script we're interested in? And that script, Memphis, really struck a chord with Kenny. And he sat down and goes, and we talked about it. And we decided ultimately, rather than them investing in the company, that they would become partners with us. So that's how it worked. And Randy and I are the managing partners. We're here based in New York, and we do the day-to-day. But Kenny and Marleen are very much a part. As they like to say, it takes four legs for the dog, right? So the dog's got four legs.
Oh, wow. What was so Memphis. Did you find that, or did that find you?
Well, Memphis is a long story, again. It was originally a brainchild of a producer named George W. George. And George was a producer. He produced several plays in the 60s and early 70s. And he got this idea to do a musical about Dewey Phillips. And so he would call my boss, Michael Price at the Goodspeed, all the time and go, I got a great idea for a musical. And Michael would say, talk to Sue. She does all the new stuff. Yeah. And George would call me and I go, George, it's not written. I can't do anything with you right now. And so, George went out. He hired Joe DiPietro. Then eventually Joe found David Bryan. Interestingly, I had been working on a separate musical with David Bryan. So I knew David. It was that, but this was going to be his, first big musical. Dave, coming off of, he's the keyboardist for Bon Jovi, right? So he'd never written a musical, but he thought, well, having my songs out there in a different way, he was excited about that. Yeah. So we talked about it. Every once in a while would go back and forth with George, and it was in its early phases. They did a presentation of the show at a festival in Palo Alto, and by intermission of that presentation, Randy knew he wanted to do the show at Palo Alto. And also John Kimball, who ran North Shore Music Theater Festival, came up to them at intermission and said, I got to run for the plane. I can't stay for the second act, but I want to do your show. So we had this trio of theaters that was interested in developing the show. Goodspeed ultimately dropped out of that development because of timing and scheduling. So it was a co-production between North Shore Music Theater and Palo Alto. And unfortunately, they rushed it a little bit, did not get the recognition, but it had a massive audience response. So George ultimately could not move the project forward, but Randy had done it at his theater. He saw the passion that the audience had for it. He worked with the guys. So when we started the company, we said, what was the show that never really got a chance that we both loved? And Memphis was right at the top of the list.
Wow.
And we went to Joe and David and said, what's going on with the show? And they said, nothing. Funny you should ask. The rights are coming up. And we said, well, would you give them to us? And they said, sure. You know, I mean, it's one of those things. It's
Just like that.
Just like that. It's like, okay, well, we know you guys.
Yeah.
And they gave us the rights. And we brought Chris Ashley in and Sergio, and that's how it happened.
It's electrifying.
It's a crazy story.
It is.
But it is about
The show
go
and
back
the
to
story.
relationships. Go back to relationships. It's
Yeah.
because we had that long history with the guys, and we also saw, you know, something in the show that we realized that had never really, you know, had given its opportunity. So
I'm so glad you guys did, because it's a beautiful show.
it's a beautiful show.
And it's smartly written. It
Yeah.
does not, there's no point does it drag,
No.
ever. I mean, it's
No.
just great. It's great.
No.
It's like
Yeah.
buckle up and enjoy it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
How have you gotten better at asking questions or asking
What
for
kinds
things?
of questions?
Well, I guess the real question I'm asking is, how have you got better at asking for things, asking for people to, you know, give you the rights, or for people to come in and join you on projects, or
You know, I guess I would say, if I were gonna, I guess you have to sort of prepare yourself to be turned down, but also acknowledge that if you don't ask, you don't get.
it's very true.
Don't assume. I do this all the time. I assume somebody's going to want to. I assume, and
Me
then
too.
in the back of my head is my father saying, "Don't assume anything. Never assume anything."
Right.
And so I have to remind myself that all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's still hard to ask, especially if you think it's a big ask. But
Yeah.
if you don't ask, you don't get. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with asking and somebody saying, you know, that's not going to happen.
That's a great point. Don't assume. No, don't.
No, don't.
I see it the same way. It's like, well, if I don't ask, it's a no, and if I ask, it could be a yes or a no. But
Yeah,
at least
exactly.
The yes is
but
now
at
a
least you've
possibility.
asked. And,
Yeah.
you know, and again, depending on what it is, and, you know, if it's a real pie in the sky, you're just careful about how you approach it. But
Of course.
if you're asking for something, there's a reason behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. We're going to do a little jumping, and I
Sure.
really appreciate you sharing these in-depth stories. I really do. It's beautiful. Speaking of beautiful, Come From Away. Mm-hmm. Gorgeous.
Thank you.
What does it mean to you? Is that
It's a beautiful show. You know, it's a show. When we first saw Come From Away, we didn't actually know what its life was going to be. We just knew that we loved the story. We loved the way the story was told. We loved the music. We loved the heartbeat of it. And what it's turned into is this sort of crazy life. You know, if you'd asked me when I started out that I would feel like I had like a whole family in Newfoundland, I would have told you were crazy, you know. But I was just up in Gander a couple weeks ago, and it was like coming home. So it's really great.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
That was meant to be,
I guess.
it would seem.
I guess
It's such a
things
beautiful-
happen for a reason, even if you don't know what the reasons are.
It is so true.
Yeah.
Were you searching for that? Come From Away?
Not
that
necessarily.
story?
Not necessarily. I think we were just at the point where we were ready to take something new on. We weren't quite sure what it was. We had a little bit of a relationship with David and Irene, the authors. We had met them. A friend of mine called me and he said, you know, my friend Jax. I mean, it was his husband's daughter's cousin. I think that's the track, is Irene Sankoff. And David and Irene had just done their show at Nymph, my mother's lesbian Jewish Wiccan wedding. And he said, these kids just need some advice. Would you meet with them? And I said, of course. And so Randy and I met with them, and we had a great time. We told them to change the title. They said no. We're like, okay, whatever, fine. Still nice to chat with you. Yeah. We checked in with them when we were in Toronto with the tour of Memphis, and they were just going into rehearsal at Sheridan College with the workshop of Come From Away. Again, we're like, what is it about? Tricky title about 9/11. Good luck. Have fun. Yeah. Didn't know any more about it until we saw it at NAMT. And then we were like blown away by it. Yeah.
Did you? I'm so curious if you recall the opening number halfway through Act 1, midway through Act 2? Was there a moment where you were like,
right from the beginning, you sort of felt it.
yeah,
You know that, and you sort of, and then just the sort of charm of the people just came off the stage so directly and so impactfully. And there were moments where you wanted to cry, and then you were laughing, and there was just something about the story and how they told it. And, you know, a lot of people were really excited about that presentation. In fact, Kenny loves to tell a story that he was like the first one out of the theater and up the aisle to talk to David and Irene. Say, I want to be part of this, you know? So yeah.
For it.
Yeah. But we also, again, like I say, we didn't scream Broadway to us. It just was a great piece of theater. And then we figured out the path for it.
I love that. I know theater is so collaborative. There's a lot of people at the table. Have you gotten better at, or how have you gotten better at, you know, pushing a point, letting a point go, you know, deciding the merit of a point that you think is important enough to share with the group?
I think when we're putting a show together, we spend a lot of time with the creative team, not while they're doing their work, but while when they've done some work and they want to bring it back. There's always a give and take. There's a conversation.
Yeah.
And so it's almost always a conversation. And I've rarely been in a place where I wanted a change or something so badly that I was willing to say, you have got to listen to me. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
There've been moments where it's like, you know, this is making me uncomfortable, or is there another way to look at this? I really don't think we can do that, guys, you know, but it's never been, it's never like an ultimatum. It's always, let's arrive at this together.
Yeah. Where does that come from for you? That sense of we?
I don't know. I've always been somebody who likes to build consensus. I think that's why I liked company management. That's why I like musicals, because it's so collaborative. And I also always try, and I think I learned this from my dad, I always try to put myself in somebody else's shoes. He used to say this thing, and I'll never forget, he goes, you reaches the level of the individual with whom you are speaking. And he was like so funny because he was a colonel in the National Guard, and he would often come home with these stories, very frustrating stories about some of his men and people that he had to discipline and stuff like that. And he said he would always have to step back and try to figure out what was going on in their heads, right? And so that stuck in my brain, and I think about it all the time. When I'm really up against something, I'm like, how are they feeling? What is their motivation? If I could get into their head, will I understand why they don't want to do this? They're acting out,
right?
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
So, I think that was a life lesson, and I turn it to my work.
That's so
Does that make
profound.
sense? It was profound. I don't think my dad thought he was being profound. He was actually kind of like joking, but because he was put on the stupid accent. But but it was something that really, really stuck with me, and it is something that I practice almost every day.
I mean, that can really change the game of a conversation when it goes to that, to we, to, you know, what are you thinking? What are you feeling?
And look, we all have egos and we all have eyes, but you try to be a we when you can be.
How's your taste changed, grown, anything since you've entered producing?
I think as a commercial producer, you just have to be a bit more selective. You know, when I was in the position of needing to program 3-4 new shows a year, I had a pretty broad spectrum of what I was looking for. I was always looking for good stories. I was always looking for people who I thought wanted the same thing I wanted in terms of level of production and what we could bring to the table. When you get, and you're producing a show on Broadway and you're thinking about the years it takes to make it happen and what you have to be able to put out there to sell 8,000 to 12,000 tickets a week, a week.
Yes.
With nothing. It's like, well, this has to be a story that's going to reach a lot of people. It has to be a story that's going to have an impact and emotional resonance. So, and I also have gotten to the place in my life that if it's not a positive message, I'm not interested. Because I think we need as much positive as we can in this world. And I'd much rather be behind that. And that's not to say anything negative about anybody else and what they choose to put out there, because there's some tough stories out there that people are telling, and good on them. But I'm always interested in something that ultimately is going to resonate in a positive way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's so true. With the entities that you guys take on and the stories you tell, and I thank you for doing that, because it helps. I mean, I saw Come From Away, I don't know, 6 months ago, and you feel like a better human.
That's right. And you come out,
and
you
all I
want to
did
do
was
something nice.
Yeah, you do. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's like a pay it forward kind of situation.
And I'm not Pollyanna. Believe me, I'm not Pollyanna. But I think a little nice goes a long way.
A little nice goes a very long way.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Is there any? I mean, there's maybe a ton, but any advice that comes to mind you would give, new producers that are looking to enter the space of theater? Well,
I talk about this a lot with folks who are earlier in their career than I. And again, I say, there are places where you're just going to have to take the job, right?
Yep.
You got to take the job and you have to learn from it. But you're ultimately going to have an aesthetic core of things that excite you and that interest you. And even with all the distractions of all the other things you have to do to make a living, don't lose sight of that. And find stories you want to tell, and find people you're passionate about promoting and sponsoring. And because that's where ultimately your lifeblood's going to be. And if you are going to get involved with a show and try to take it to the very end, you're going to be with it for a very long time. So you have to really love it.
That's so true.
And again, I have never succeeded with anything that I took on because I thought it was going to be a commercial success. I took it on because I loved it.
Yeah.
And then did my best to make it a commercial success. But I don't look at something immediately as, that's a great idea to sell a lot of tickets.
Yeah. We're going to make a lot of money, kid.
A lot of money. I'm going to make a lot of money with this show. Never works. Never works.
Never works. That's really good. That's really good advice. What is there a show that's taught you the most about yourself?
Oh, golly, I don't think so.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Not that comes to mind immediately.
Okay. In life, what's most important to you?
Oh, my family.
Yeah.
My family. And I'm also, that my work is really important to me. And that balance is something that I struggle with all the time. But bottom line, my relationships are the most important thing.
Of course.
Yeah.
Are there changes you've made that have increased positivity and decreased negativity in your life?
Nothing I can immediately point to. I do think one of the things you have to learn is when to sort of step back and take a breather, or when to walk away. And if something is not going the way you want it to, if it's making you unhappy, like truly unhappy, you should stop doing it. Do you know what I mean? And try to find things that make you want to get up in the morning.
There's an interesting balance there. If something's
Always.
making you unhappy and you should stop doing it, but also it's making you unhappy and you should finish it anyway.
Well, yeah, but
I don't know.
Look, sometimes I'm talking about, like, there are times I'm like, this has been the worst day. Nothing has gone right. You know what? I'm done. I'm leaving. I'm going home.
Yeah.
I'll be back tomorrow. Or turn the computer off, shut the door. I'm done. And sometimes it's as easy as, I'm not dealing with this today.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to fix itself in a way that I want it to fix itself. So it's not about putting things away because I'm procrastinating. It's putting things away because I don't have a clear head about how I'm going to resolve it.
You need a night's sleep.
Yeah,
you need
or something.
Or a removal from it
Something.
to come back with a clear head.
Something.
That makes complete and total sense.
Yeah.
Do you have favorite books? Most gifted books? Any
No.
documentaries?
No.
Do you consume content?
No, I am a popular culture void, first of all. I don't watch television. I watch movies on airplanes. No, I do like to read, but I read to escape. I read murder mysteries.
They're great.
I was just listening to somebody yesterday. We were talking about all the different biographies they had read, and I was like, I should do more of that. I just should. But there's only so much brain space.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily like being connected all the time. Sometimes I like to cook. I'll go home and cook.
That's great.
Yeah.
Do you have rules for yourself with disconnecting, from your phone, your tablet, or anything? Yes and
Not
no.
hard and fast, but I try not to be stupid about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's great.
Take a walk. Don't take your phone. Because then you use your brain a little bit. Or how do you find those places where you're just thinking, and coming up with ideas? I don't do that enough. I absolutely don't do that enough. I will acknowledge that. I'm always looking for something to do to stay busy. I need to find ways to disconnect more than I do.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, especially in this city. I mean, when you're here, you're here.
Yeah. And they're long days. I was thinking about it. Like you work all day in the office, then and I like to pop over to the theater, and then I'm a Tony voter, so I have to see everything that comes in, and then I would like to see other things,
Yeah.
And then I travel a lot, so it's not like I'm sitting around bored. I'm never bored ever.
Yeah. It's difficult to be in this business. Bored.
Bored. But what you do? But sometimes if you're like you've got 10 minutes, rather than do something constructive, I'll sit there and go, oh, maybe I'll look at my computer. It's like, no, just let that go. Just stop doing that. Stop doing that. You're just like, all this stuff is assaulting you. Let it go. Let it go.
Let it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this. This is such a great conversation. Thank you for sharing all this.
Oh, please.
Sue, this has been a joy. So usually I end with like a billboard quote, metaphorically speaking.
Oh, Lordy.
Word or phrase. It can be an advert. It can be anything that resonates.
I don't know. Don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid.
Be kind. I'll come up with a few things.
Yeah. No, those are
Yeah.
the simplest ones. Sometimes if you really pay attention to it.
Sometimes be patient.
It's be patient. Have you gotten better at that?
I try to be patient.
It's a daily practice.
It's a daily practice.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
This has been great.
Well, thank you. I sort of blathered a bit.
No, I love it. I love it. I love these longer conversations because it's more than just like, what's your favorite show? Next question. What's your favorite color?
Yeah.
We can your upbringing.
Well, you didn't ask me easy questions.
No. I guess not. I like to think they're easy. No. Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to add before we hop off the air here?
Thank you. No, all good.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Sue Frost.
You've been listening to Entertainment X, the podcast. You can follow Entertainment X on Instagram at _EntertainmentX_. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join Clay next week for another curiosity conversation on Entertainment X. Thank you for listening.